Right. Let's begin. So today is Shiva Chabad, the 17th day of Tammuz. Today is Shiva Chabad, the 17th day of Tammuz. We know that on this day, many things happen. Specifically, 5 things happen, and among them, Moshe broke the luchos, the first luchos, the tablets, and of course, on this day, both the walls of Jerusalem were breached. Everyone agrees that it was on the 17th of Tammuz that the second Beis Hamikdash, the walls were breached. And according to the Talmud Bavli, on the first one it was on the 9th of Tammuz, but the Rishalmi actually says it was the 17th of Tammuz also. So there's a reason to say that. Anyhow, this is a sikha that the Rebbe spoke about in 1987. This was said on Shiva Chabad Tammuz after Mincha. After the Daven Mincha, while they were waiting for the time to go on for the fast to finish, the Rebbe spoke this sikha. So we're going to give bits and pieces of the sikha. He says, it's customary to say divrei kivushin on a fast day, after Mincha. What is divrei kivushin? So the word kivushin means, kavish means to conquer. Words that conquer.
More a little higher. Bring up the microphone a little higher.
Words that conquer. Okay, maybe that's better. There we go. Words that conquer or press onto something. The word kivushin means, what it means is that the rabbis traditionally, on a fast day, would give a sermon, a drasha, on repentance, on teshuvah. Because after all, what does the 17th day of Tammuz represent? What is every fast day all about? It's about teshuvah. It's not about fasting at all. It's about doing teshuvah. Every single fast day. Yom Kippur, obviously, but Tisha B'Av, for doing teshuvah, for the temple being destroyed. And in general, every fast day is about teshuvah. Why is it, so the Rebbe is going to ask, why is it that the custom of divrei kivushin is on a fast day, dafka after Mincha? Why after Mincha? What's so special about that? So he says we should mention the special quality of Mincha. And we know that during the week, there are 3 prayers, Shacharis, Mincha, and Mariv. Or actually, more correctly, Mariv, Shacharis, and Mincha, in the order. At night first, and then in the morning, and the day. So what is this all about? We know that a person gets up in the morning, early in the morning, and goes to work. So before they go to work, they get dressed, they get ready. Before they go to work, they go to shul, and they pray Shacharis. And the idea of Shacharit is that it prepares us for the rest of the day, that our dealings should be honest, that we should have God in mind in everything we do during the daytime, that we should, as I mentioned, honesty and modesty in the way we act towards others. And in general, Shacharis gives us the proper way that we are to act during the daytime. Then, in the middle of the day, we stop what we're doing when we're the busiest of all. It used to be in the old days, they would daven mincha in the middle of the day. Today, we don't do that. So today, most shuls, most communities, they daven mincha later on in the early evening, followed immediately by Mariv, and they learn something between mincha and Mariv. So they do Shacharis at the beginning, and then many hours later they do mincha and Mariv together, sort of like we do. But in the old days, mincha was done in the middle of the day. In fact, I remember when I was in yeshiva, we used to we would learn till about 2 o'clock, and then we would have a mincha about 3:15. In many of the yeshivas, they would do that. They would have a mincha around the middle of the afternoon. You know, in New York, in Wall Street, in the business districts, there are many different mincha minyanim. I remember when I was in college, when I went to York University in Toronto years ago when I was a kid, we had a mincha minyan at the university in the middle of the day, 1:30, something like that. So it was customary very often to do mincha in the middle of the afternoon, in the early afternoon or the middle of the afternoon. And then they would daven Ma'ariv at night after they finished their whole day, and they would wrap it all up and take a cheshbon and nefesh, make this, the determination of what they did during the daytime, and daven Ma'ariv later. That's generally how it worked. So our sages say in the Gemara Brachos, the prophet Eliyahu Navi, was answered only at mincha time. We see from this that it is an auspicious time for prayer, when everyone's prayers are readily received. So mincha is a very special time for prayer to be received. Why? Because we are probably the least spiritual of all. The morning, I can understand. You wake up in the morning, your head is still in the clouds from the nighttime, from your sleep, and you're still getting going, getting moving. And at nighttime, you're wrapping it up, and you come home, you come to shul, and you slow down already. You're a little more spiritual attitude about life. But mincha, we're rush, busy the whole day, and in the middle of all that, we stop, we daven, and so therefore the prayer that we offer in mincha is a very auspicious one, a very special one. Hashem loves that prayer more than any others. And he says the mincha prayer on Shabbos is special, as seen from the fact that we recite the verse stating that it is an auspicious time, Eis Ratzon. The Zohar explains that all negative forces are transformed at this time to the positive. So mincha is the highest level on Shabbos, the highest level of Shabbos. It culminates everything that we've been working on. Therefore, on mincha, after mincha, we eat Suda Shlishit, Shalashudas, which is generally a light meal, when we're not really that hungry anyways, or we're only eating because we had 2 heavy meals before that. But we eat Shalashudas because we are doing it because it's a mitzvah to eat, not because we're hungry, but because it's a mitzvah to eat. And because at that time of day, we're able to elevate the food to a very high level. And that's why the Zohar says that all negative forces are transformed then into positive. He says, but the story of Eliyahu, when we say that Eliyahu's prayers were answered on mincha, it wasn't referring to Shabbos mincha. It was referring to just a regular, mundane, weekday mincha. And this, even still, it made Eliyahu's prayers auspicious during that time, even though it wasn't even Shabbos. The fact, the Rebbe says, that his prayer's acceptance was attributed to the fact that it was mincha, proves that even a weekday mincha has special qualities to it, even a weekday mincha. This is also seen by the famous saying of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe that mincha comes out in the middle of the day, unlike the other prayers, which come either before or after the day's work, as I said. So in order to daven mincha, you need to make an extra effort to tear yourself away from work, making it extremely precious in the eyes of God. I remember when I was in college years ago, I was probably 18 years old, 19 years old, that we had a bunch of kids, students, who decided we wanted to make a mincha prayer at the university. This was at York University in Toronto, if anyone's listening from Toronto. Today, York University is not like what it used to be in those days. Today, it's overrun by anti-Semites and pro-PLO people. But in those days, it was very Jewish. All the Jewish kids went to York. So we decided to make a minyan for mincha in the middle of the day. So we got a classroom, an empty classroom. I don't think we even asked permission. We just saw an empty classroom every day. So we took it, and we would have a minyan for mincha. The only problem was we didn't get a minyan every day. After all, students are busy. And it was a commuter school, so when kids finished their classes, they went home. So we would daven mincha most of the time with a minyan, but occasionally without a minyan. One day, this was, keep in mind, this is the late 1960s. One day, we were short one from the minyan. So, we did what I usually do now. We go outside, you make calls, and you look around, see if there's any Jews around. So I went outside. Now, this classroom was in the middle of the main student center, you know, where they have all the restaurants and the stores, and all the kids, they connect over there. So there were a lot of people, and it was at that time it was a very Jewish school. So I went outside to try to flag down a Jew for mincha, and I take a look, and right outside our door, there was a young man who was manning a table, and this guy was a Marxist, namely a communist, but he was a Maoist, you know, from Chairman Mao, which those days was very, very popular. They had the little red book, you know, little red book. And this kid was Jewish. It's common those days also.
They started the whole Marxism.
That's right, Karl Marx. So I go outside and I see this guy. His name was Marty, I think. And I knew him, you know, from around. Everybody knew him because he was always out there with his little red book and talking to people, trying to convince them to be Maoists and everything. And so I said to him, Marty, maybe you'd like to join us for a minyan. We need a 10th man. Now, you know, communists are atheists. That's their shita. That's their viewpoint. They're real big communists. So I looked at him. I thought to myself, I've got to be nuts asking this guy if he wants to join us for minyan for mincha. But he did. Once we needed a 10th man, and he was the Jew, and, you know. So he looked at me, and what do you think he said? Sure. Sure. So he goes, leaves his table, he comes to us. I gave him a yarmulke, he was happy to put it on, and we're davening mincha, and he's sitting there and he's shuckling back and forth, davening mincha, and everything. And I couldn't believe it. At the end of the minyan, we thanked him for coming, and he said to me, anytime you need help, I'm always here, you know, let me know if you ever need a minyan. I said to him, Marty, let me ask you a question. You daven so beautifully, like a real religious Jew. How come you do that if you're a Marxist communist? And he said to me, he said, Moishe, I may be a communist, but I'm still a Jew.
Beautiful.
I'm still a Jew. So, there you go. And it was mincha time that this happened. So anyhow, there's a saying of the previous Rebbe that we daven mincha because it's a very special time in the eyes of God. In such a special time, it's obvious that everything must have reached a high level of holiness. And even things which were negative have been transformed to good. In our case, the divrei kivushim, these words, these Torah words of repentance, which could indicate admonishment for transgression. In other words, why are we saying these words of kivushim? Because we did some sins, we transgressed, and the rabbi is showing us how we should improve ourselves. So it sounds like it's a bit negative. You know, we're trying to tell somebody off, admonish somebody for sins that they committed. Instead, this takes on a whole positive tone. In this case, the word kivushim actually comes from the phrase, he will suppress the yichbosh, our iniquities, and cast all of their sins into the depth of the sea. So in other words, of this, we believe, that's not so much that God is telling us off, but rather God is taking our sins and throwing them into the sea, throwing them away. Even more so, our sins should be transformed into merits, and everyone should reach the level of a Baal Tshuva, which a tzaddik cannot even hope to reach. What does this mean? We are told that when the time of Mashiach, and even now when we become a Baal Tshuva, we are confronted with those things that we did in the past, and we're not proud of them. We did certain things that we're not proud of, whether it was with transgressions between us and God. Maybe we ate something not kosher, we violated the Shabbos, we didn't pray every day, didn't put on tefillin the way we're supposed to, whatever it may be. Or it was laws between man and man. We didn't give enough charity, we told slander or gossip against other people, we embarrass people, or whatever it may be, whatever these things are, we feel, look, we've done some terrible things in our life. We're not very pure. So what happens when we do teshuvah? Teshuvah, the word teshuvah means tashuv hey, return to God. The hey means for God. We return to God. So when we return to God, God takes those sins that we've done and He throws them into the sea. And how does He do that? By transforming them into merits, transforming them into zechuyah, into good deeds. Every sin we did is now a mitzvah. How does that work? We ate, God forbid, not kosher. So the non-kosher is now transformed into kosher. It's holy because we've done teshuvah for it. In the past, it was not kosher, it wasn't a good thing. But once we've done teshuvah on this thing, it now becomes kosher and holy because we completely transformed it. Every mitzvah we do is now, every transgression we do has now been transformed into a mitzvah, into a merit for us. How does this work? God looks at us and said, let me take a look at this guy. Interesting. What merits do you have? What do you possibly have that's good about you? What's good about me? God, I used to eat pork. Really? That's not so good. You used to eat pork? Yeah, but I don't anymore. Oh, that's very good. I used to violate Shabbos. That's not good. But I keep Shabbos now. Wow, that's great. And so on and so forth. Every transgression we do is now transformed into a merit on our behalf, that we can go to God and say, yes, I did those things. I'm not proud of them. I did them for whatever reason. Maybe I didn't know they were wrong, or maybe I was not brought up in such a way that I didn't know about it. But now those things that we used to do are held. God holds them in our merit, and God looks at them and says, "Wow, look at this person. Look at all the things they used to do, and now they don't do them anymore. Now they're sitting and learning Torah. Now they're davening with the minyan and all of these wonderful things. And therefore, that's why we say, our sages say that in a place that a Baal Tshuva stand, even a complete tzaddik can't stand there. That a Baal Tshuva, a repentance, is even on a higher spiritual level than a tzaddik, a completely righteous person. Why? Because the righteous person was righteous. They never had to fight their Yetzer Hara. They never had to work hard to transform themselves. That's how they were raised. That's how they were born. That's who they are. They have no other, according to Hasidic philosophy, they don't really have a Yetzer Hara that bothers them anymore. They've conquered their Yetzer Hara. Perhaps that's what it means. Divrei Kiddushin, they've conquered it. They've conquered their Yetzer Hara. So it doesn't give them any trouble anymore. Mashe'en ken, however, a Baal Tshuva had to work very hard in conquering it and working very hard about it. That's the nature, that's the level of the Beinoni. The intermediate person. He's not wicked, but he's not a complete tzaddik either. But he is an intermediate person. What does that mean, a Beinoni? According to the Tanya, a Beinoni is somebody who has a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, has a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination, and is constantly fighting his Yetzer Hara. He's every moment of the day, he's fighting his Yetzer Hara. But what? He always wins. He always conquers it. Unlike a tzaddik, who has completely conquered his Yetzer Hara. The tzaddik does not have to worry about it giving him a hard time. He's conquered it already. But a Beinoni, a Baal Tshuva, is somebody who really hasn't. The Rebbe continues, the affirmation applies to every fast day. There are also particular lessons to be derived from, first of all, the 17th of Tammuz, and also about the weekly Torah portion, and of the daily section of the Parsha, and of the daily section of Rambam, which we learn every day. I don't know if I'll get to all of those, but we are now in the Parsha of Pinchas, And Pinchas talks about a very great sin that a Jewish prince did in taking a Midianite woman and having relations with her. And Pinchas goes and he slays both of them. He kills both of them in one act. And of course, the rabbis asked the question: was this a proper thing for him to do? He didn't. He did it on his own. He asked Moshe for advice. The halacha was hidden from Moshe, but so therefore Pinchas went ahead and took the law into his own hands. The rabbis asked if this was correct because they come to the conclusion that it was correct. And as Rashi points out, that zealous people, Kanayim, Kovimbo, they conquered their Yetzer Hara, and they are greater for it. The Mishnah tells us that 5 tragedies occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. Each one contains a lesson for us, and it's difficult to pick one for discussion. It says, however, since in today's Salichos that we read this morning at davening, in the morning, there is a Pismon, one of the prayers, which repeatedly stresses the breaking of the walls of Yerushalayim, as we will discuss this aspect. So really, when we think of the 17th of Tammuz, we consider more the idea of the destruction of the walls of Jerusalem. A wall, the Rebbe says, has both physical and spiritual meaning. In the physical sense, a wall protects those within from undesirable invaders, and in addition, unites those within its boundaries into a single existence. So it saves us from invaders on one hand, from people on the outside, and it unites those inside the boundaries. It's interesting when the spies came to Eretz Yisrael, they reported back that the walls were very fortified. They were fortified walls, they were strong walls. And this meant that they were strong people, they were protected people. However, you can learn it a different way. Strong walls sometimes means that the people inside are weak. They're weak. Why are they weak? Because they need to depend on the walls inside of them, and that's outside of them to protect them. If the walls are non-existent, the people are stronger. I remember many years ago, we had a group of women from a yeshuv in Israel called Kadmonim. What's it called?
Far Kadmonim?
Kadmonim, Kadurim,
Kadima, maybe?
Kaduma. Is it Kaduma?
Kadima.
No, it's Kaduma. It's Kaduma.
Okay.
Kadumi, something like that. Anyhow, it was a yeshuv in the West Bank.
Kedumim.
Kedumim.
Okay.
Yeah. It was interesting that they sent to raise money and to publicize it, not a bunch of big men, but a couple women. The mayor and another woman. They came. It was a religious community, and they came to raise funds and to draw up, publicity and support for their Kedumim, for their yeshuv. And we were all very impressed. They told us an interesting thing. They said that when they started their settlement, the Israeli army came and offered to build a wall or a fence around their yeshuv to ward off the Arab terrorists. The women, who were the leaders of the yeshuv, after all, you've got to depend on the women for these things, they rejected the army's offer. They said, no, we don't want it. Why? Because if we put up a fence around us, it will tell them that we are weak. If we don't have a fence, it will show that we're strong. And they did not have it. I think to this day, they did not have a fence around that. Again, it takes women to see the truth of something like that.
It's a fear of Gvura. Women has Gvura.
Yeah, that's right. So he says here, the spiritual wall has corresponding characteristics. The wall which surrounds Yerushalayim unites all Jews into a single existence through total Ahavas Yisrael. You go to Israel today, and when you walk down to the Kollel, before you get there, you have to go through the walls of Jerusalem, of the city. And you see, today we don't see too many walled cities anymore. If you look at that wall, and you think, I know every time I look at it, especially for the first time I go visit, the wall for me represents strength and unity and power. But also the unity of the people who live there, live inside the wall. Now, Baruch Hashem, there are many Jews who live inside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And it's a wonderful thing. This unites not only them, the wall, but all their possessions, everything they have. This can be readily understood from the law of an Ir Hanidachas, which was an idolatrous city, that if a city had a majority of people who were idol worshippers, it was called Ir Hanidachas and it had to be destroyed, of which all the inhabitants are executed, in fact. And all their possessions, including the animals, plants, and parts of the inorganic kingdom, are also destroyed. So that a person's possessions are part of who they are part of who they are as well. There's an expression, Marba Nechasi and Marba Daigas, Marba Nechasi and Marba Dagot, I think it's a Perkiyavos, which means increase your possessions, you increase your worries. Right? Possessions are part of who we are. You figure, why do we have to worry about our possessions as long as we're safe, as long as we're healthy? Because possessions are part of who we are. And this is an unfortunate thing. You know, we see sometimes when, I remember a friend of mine had a house in one of the northern communities in San Diego, and his whole house went down to the ground. Everything was lost. Every single thing was lost. And he came out of it, and his attitude was, okay, at least we're healthy. At least we didn't harm ourselves. Possessions, we'll be able to rebuild, we'll be able to acquire again. Our lives will never be able to do that. But a person's possessions are very often a reflection of who they are. You know, the things we have in our house, you can tell in your house who you are. Someone once came to my house, and they look around the house, they see pictures of the Rebbe, pictures of people lighting candles, menorahs, mezuzahs on the doorposts, and all these types of things. And they say, Rabbi, let me ask you a question. If I were to come to a house, a Chabad house in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, would it look like your house, or would it look something different? And I would say, I would suspect that the house that you would go to in Brooklyn would look exactly like my house. The same thing, with the little children running around with yarmulkes and tzitzis, pictures on the wall depicting Jewish scenes, and tzaddikim on the wall, strictly kosher, and Chol of Yisrael products, and all of these things. They're the same as Crown Heights, exactly. With mezuzahs of the highest caliber, just like you find in Brooklyn. So we find, therefore, that a person's animals, they say that even sometimes animals look like the people who own them. Vegetables, even things that are non-organic, they are part of who we are as well. So all of our possessions within the walls of Jerusalem are just like us. Therefore, when this wall is broken, everything within its boundaries is broken and affected also. And since physical matters derive their existence and evolve from the spiritual, this spiritual breakage eventually becomes manifested in the breach of the physical wall as well. Interesting, when someone passes away, you go into their house, there's something that is missing. The house, there's something there. A person's possessions, how do they deal with those possessions? Someone called me just yesterday, a non-Jew, and he wanted to donate all of the shoes from his mother and his father to the synagogue. He says these are very expensive shoes. My father was a wealthy man, and he collected, my mother, and they collected a whole closet full, big closet full of all different shoes. And they're beautiful and expensive and fashionable and the top designers. We'd like to donate them to the synagogue, maybe we can use them. So you might be familiar with the fact that when someone passes away, you are allowed to give away their clothes. You're allowed to do that. In fact, in many cases, it's a good thing to do. Give away, people need them. People are poor. They could use clothing, and some of the clothing that we have, and so the possessions we have, could be put to good use, with one exception. That one exception is one's shoes. You're not allowed, according to Jewish law, to give away a person's shoes. They have to be either kept or destroyed. You're not allowed to give away a person's shoes. Why is that? I'm sure there are different reasons. One reason that I was thinking of is because they say you cannot never fill a person's shoes. Somebody once asked me, how come there's not a successor to the Lubavitcher Rebbe? And I answered, because no one can fill his shoes. The Rebbe had tremendous shoes. So for that reason, we don't do that. But everything else in a person's home, you go to a shiva house, for example, and you look around, and you see all of the things that a person accumulated in their lifetime. All the beautiful things and pictures on the wall, and beautiful pieces of furniture, and some of it could be very expensive, and all the things that a person accumulated, and the person is not there anymore. Why? Because we don't take these things with us. These things are part of who we are. They are part of who we are. We leave them behind because in a spiritual sense, they represent who we are. As mentioned above, however, we must find a positive meaning in the concept of the walls being breached. Of course, it was a terrible tragedy, and we fast that the walls were destroyed. But what was positive about it? We can understand this by first comparing it to another event which occurred on the same day. That is, Shviras Haluchos, the breaking of the Ten Commandments that Moshe brought down from Mount Sinai during Shavuos. At that time, this was also a breaking. So we see that the walls of Jerusalem were broken, and the tablets were also broken. These are very miraculous tablets. We are told that the tablets were carved by God himself, and they were engraved by God. God engraved them himself, unlike the second tablets, which Moshe created. Moshe prepared them, Moshe wrote on them. In spite of the fact that this was a negative event, obviously, these holy, holy tablets were destroyed. And in fact, later on, the pieces of the tablets were put into the Aron Kodesh in the temple. But nevertheless, they were destroyed. It was a terrible tragedy. We still find, Rebbe says, that God thanked Moshe for breaking them. Why did he thank them for breaking them? Rashi explains this by bringing a metaphor. He says, imagine a king who went on a trip and left his queen behind. The queen's servants behaved immorally, and perhaps the queen even took part in their immoral behavior. And this was a rumor that spread all around, that the queen was also part of their immorality. Fearing that the king would execute her, his advisor, the advisor to the king, destroyed the proof that they were married. If they weren't married, so she could go ahead and do what she wants with whoever she wants, pretty much. But if they were married, then it was adultery. So the advisor wanted to reduce the culpability of the queen, and this is what he was really worried about. So he tried to destroy proof of their marriage. Here, the king is God, who is very often compared to a groom. The queen is the Jewish people, who are compared very often to a bride, her servants. The mixed multitude, the Erev Rav, those that the Egyptians that followed the Jews out of Egypt, they converted to Judaism. They were like the servants. They were like the advisor. They were like the advisor. Moshe. The mixed multitude was like the advisor, Moshe, and the proof of the tablets. Knowing that only the mixed multitude had served the golden calf, Moshe broke the tablets in order that God should differentiate between them and the Jews and spare them. If there's no luchos, there's no Torah, there's no prohibitions. Right? The prohibitions are gone because the luchos, the Torah was not given to the Jews. In fact, we are told that it was only in the second luchos, the second ones, that Moshe received the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. He did not receive Torah, according to opinions, he did not receive Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition, and the commentaries and explanation the first time. He only received it the second time. So it was actually, oddly to say, a blessing that the tablets were broken. Because if they were broken, if they were not broken, then the Jewish people would be fully responsible, all the Jewish people would be fully responsible for the sin of the Egel Zav. And in reality, it was even though they were punished later, but it was much less than it would have been if they were not punished. So actually, they're saying that in a sense it was a blessing for the Jewish people that these were broken. Obviously, it would be better if they didn't sin altogether. In a deeper sense, breaking the tablets caused the Jews to do teshuvah. It was the reason why the Jews did teshuvah was because they were broken, and thereby reach a higher level than was possible beforehand. So the tablets given the second time were in many respects on a higher spiritual level than the first ones, because they were also with the Torah Sheba'al Peh as well, the oral Torah as well. Breaking the wall can also be explained in a positive sense. A wall is a boundary and limitation which denotes where the city ends. The city is outside the wall. There's an idea of breaking limitations in a holy way by going beyond one's limitations in the performance of holy deeds. This is explained by the verse, to live in a Yerushalayim without walls, Brazos Teishev Yerushalayim. That the goal is to live in a Jerusalem, live in a place that we don't need walls anymore, that the walls are not necessary anymore. In fact, it's interesting that here in America, we talk about the wall between us and Mexico, that we're building this big wall. We don't hear about any walls between us and Canada. Why not? Because the walls between us and Canada are safe, and immigration is legal, and we don't find so many people violating that border. It's not necessary. It's not a problem. It's only the wall that we find in Mexico that is necessary. It's too bad. It's unfortunate. I'm sure even the president, who's a big supporter of the wall, realizes that it's not good to have that wall. Unfortunately, we need it, but it's too bad. Similarly, when they built the wall in Israel, as we know, a huge wall. If you go to Israel, you see it looks like the Great Wall in China. It curves around, and it's all over the place. Wherever you go by bus or by car, all over, you'll see this tremendous wall. The wall has, I think, been responsible for a tremendous reduction in terrorism. We still find terrorist acts from time to time, but by and large, it has prevented a lot of these terrorist acts, which is good. But it's also bad, because here we are in our own country, and we have to wall ourselves up against our enemies. We need to do that. How sad it was. How sad. Maybe there's better ways to do it. Strengthening our military, reinforcing our borders in a stronger way. During the late 1960s, early 1970s, after the 6-Day War, so there was a great deal during that time. Some of you might remember, if you were around at that time, that the Arab terrorists were getting through all over the place. Every place, wherever you went, they went into Netanya. They went through the north. They came down from the north. They came from Jordan and the east. A lot of them came through the Mediterranean Sea on flimsy boats. There were terrorist attacks going on all the time. And it seemed that the Israeli government was unable to curb these attacks, to stop them. And it became very frustrating. During that time, I remember I was a yeshiva student in New York, and I remember the Rebbe spoke about it. What did he say? He said, if we want to make physical borders, if we want to prevent our enemies from coming in and wreaking havoc with us, in order to do that, we need to create spiritual borders. Spiritual borders will create what we need for physical borders. Without the physical borders. And what are spiritual borders? The borders between Jewish people and the non-Jewish people. Now, in those days, the big controversy was the issue of Mihu Yehudi. Who is a Jew? Exactly who is considered a Jew? So we know that in Jewish law, a Jew is somebody who is defined as either being born of a Jewish mother or who converted according to halacha. When the state of Israel was formed, so Ben Gurion went around and he asked leading rabbis, including the Rebbe, including Rabbi Soloveitchik and many others, he asked them, what should we define a Jew as? Ben Gurion was not a religious man or a very Torah knowledgeable man, but he respected rabbis and he respected Judaism. So he asked them, what should be the criteria for being a Jew? Now we know in most countries, if you are born in that country, you are a citizen of that country. In America, if you're born in America, even if you're here illegally, in many cases you are an American citizen. We're trying to change that law, but in many cases that's how it is. Or you become a naturalized citizen. And to be a naturalized citizen, you need to study, you need to be American, you need to learn the language, you need to take a test, that you have basic knowledge of American government, and things like that. Anyone who has become an American citizen knows they've gone through that. And then after you learn, you study, you take a test, after that you need to be signed in and you need to make an oath that you are going to promise to keep the laws of that country. And you cannot just become a citizen and go vote without studying and without studying and taking a test about the culture and laws of the country. You need to take an oath. You need to promise that you're going to follow the laws. Jewish law is the same way. If a non-Jew wants to become a Jew, we're happy that they want to become a Jew. First, we tell them it's difficult. There's a lot of laws. Are you sure you want this? And if they say they still want it, so we say, okay, you need to study. You need to learn all about Jewish law. How to keep Shabbos, how to keep holy days, how to daven, how to read Hebrew, how to do all these. You need to know something of the history of the Jewish people. Many did the laws of the Jewish people, so the basic Jewish books, etc., etc. Then the rabbis will test you and see if you know these things. If you don't, sent back to go over things that you're weak on, the things that you need to learn. And then after that, you need to take an oath. You need to take a test. You need to take an oath, rather, that you're going to promise that you're going to keep the laws of the Torah. So we take this convert into a mikveh, a ritual bath, and before they immerse, the rabbis, the Bezdin, the rabbinical court, makes a promise or asks them, do you promise, do you swear before God that you are going to keep the laws of the Torah, both the positive laws and the negative laws? They go and they explain a few of the positives, a few of the negatives. And once the person agrees to do that, then they immerse in the mikveh and they come out a brand new child, ger shenizgayer, a convert that converts to katan dami. It's just like a newborn child is born. They become a brand new person, a brand new person. So Ben Gurion went to the rabbis and said, what should be? In Israel, we have an interesting, unique problem. In Israel, the religious criteria for being a Jew is the same as being a citizen to be a Jew. Today, actually, you can become an Arab can become a citizen also without being a Jew. So, what should be? So, the rabbis said that it should be defined according to halacha, according to Jewish law. According to Jewish law, any Jew born of a Jewish mother who has converted according to halacha is Jewish. And that should be the definition. Except of course if they're an Arab or whatever, then they, I guess, get a different type of citizenship. I'm not familiar with that. So Ben Gurion established it in 1972 with pressure from the more liberal American Jewish community, who said that their conversions are no longer recognized, are not recognized, they want to be recognized. So the Israeli government, the Knesset, changed the rule that instead of saying Gir Kahalacha, conversion according to Jewish law, they just say Gir, conversion, which let it open to any kind of conversion by any rabbi, in any which case. The Reform and Conservative were very happy with this because now their conversions would be recognized. But the problem that came up, that the Rebbe pointed out very well, was that now we have no standards. Can you imagine coming into the United States and saying, I don't have to learn anything, I don't have to take any tests, I don't have to take any oaths, I live here, so I'm an American, I should be able to vote, I should be free to vote, I should be free to exercise any privileges that any other American does. After all, I'm in this country, I pay taxes, why shouldn't I? And there are some people who believe that. We say, no, that's not how it works. You need to take an oath, you need to study, you need to be tested on your knowledge of Americana. You need to do these things. So in most countries it's like that. Virtually every country is like that. You need to learn about it. And can you imagine me going to France and saying, okay, I want to be a Frenchman? They say, parlez-vous français? I say, I'm sorry, I don't speak any French. How can you be a Frenchman if you don't speak? Well, okay, we'll give you a test. Do you know about the French government, the French, how it works, and civics? I have no idea. I have no idea. And what about an oath? Are you going to promise that you're going to keep the laws of France? And, well, only if I like them. If I don't like them, I probably won't keep them. They'll say, you see that plane that's taking off back for America? You're going to be on the first plane going back to America. We don't want you. So the Rebbe came along and said, listen, we need standards. And even the Reform. I remember one time, we'll finish soon, I remember one time I had a friend from my York University who became conservative rabbi. So I saw one of them fairly recently, a couple of years ago, who was visiting San Diego. And I said to him, let me ask you a question. Without getting too controversial about this, would you accept a Reformed convert? Let's say a woman came to you who was Jewish, born Jewish, or converted by you, and she was going to marry a young man who only had a Reformed conversion. What does it mean? He didn't go to the mikveh, he went to a swimming pool. He never had a circumcision. Would you marry them? And he said, no. I said, why not? Because it's not a proper conversion. Can you imagine that? It's not a proper. So I said, so your conversions are also, according to my standards, not a proper conversion. I know many conservative rabbis who use a swimming pool. They don't use a moya to do the bris, and they don't require Kabbalah's own mitzvahs to accept upon yourself the mitzvahs of the Torah. They don't accept it. So why should I follow your lower standards, which are not conforming to Allah? He had no answer for that. He had no answer. So the Rebbe came along and said, listen, if we want to stop these physical breaking of our barriers so that the terrorists are coming in, we need to strengthen our spiritual barriers as well. That's what we need to do. Strengthen our spiritual barriers. And how do we do that? By Gir Halacha, by keeping mitzvahs, by showing that we have basic differences between us and the non-Jews. That the non-Jews do not have to keep kosher. They don't need to keep Shabbos. They're not. In fact, a non-Jew is not allowed to keep Shabbos. The difference between Jews and Gentiles is very different. And we need to emphasize that. Not that we are against non-Jews, God forbid, but the fact is that there are differences, between us, and we say this in Abdallah, Ben Yisrael, Amim, between the Jewish people and the rest of the nation. And in order to create strong borders, strong boundaries, we need to strengthen our spiritual boundaries as well. In fact, this is more of a spiritual lesson for the 17th of Tammuz. I hope you follow it, and I hope you're able to understand it. Shalom, everyone. Shalom. We'll see you next week.
Sure. Sure. Cool.